room and all that sort of stuff. And I'm not even talking about like, they make court out to be this incredibly exciting and sexy world in these legal dramas and stuff like that. To me, it's really exciting. I'm studying this stuff, so of course it is. But it's not like it is in the movies, blah, 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 blah. I'm not even talking about that. Like it's a situation where, you have an actor portraying a lawyer. They're performing and they have to capture your attention in such a way that's intriguing, and it makes you want to continue watching whatever show that you're watching. It isn't like that in real life necessarily. First of all, they're not necessarily playing to an audience in the same way that you see on television. Of course, they're playing in such a way that they can be heard by the jury and by the judge, and that's all they really care about. The other thing of it is that, like, by and large, these are people who are very well studied, but they're maybe not the most eloquent of speakers or most eloquent of writers. They're not necessarily the best presenters in the world, and that certainly seemed to be a problem that Eamon had in the trial. Based on what I could tell from Cabana's podcast, apparently his lawyer was basically like, "Why the fuck are we here? This is so stupid." Colt Cabana, like even if Punk were telling lies and spewing lies and actually libeling and slandering Dr. Eamon or Dr. Eamon, what the hell does Cabana have to do with this? It was just a podcast. He was just doing an interview, and as far as he knew, he was being truthful. So I don't know. Like, I'm glad for these guys that this stuff is over. Punk fights in the UFC on Saturday, which I think is crazy. I think it's a real shame for him. He's probably not going to win that fight just simply because his life has been focused on this for the past week rather than the last sort of days of his training camp. So it'll be interesting to see the effect that this has on him tomorrow evening, I guess. I'm not a UFC guy by any stretch of the imagination. I pay attention to this trial because CM Punk was a WWE champion, and I was a big fan of him in the WWE. I might watch the CM Punk fight tomorrow night. I don't know. It'll realistically come down to, is it difficult for me to go see it at a bar? And by difficult, I mean, do I have to walk more than 10 minutes in order to get to a bar in order to watch this fight? If it takes any longer than that, I'm probably not going to bother, to be perfectly honest. Anyhow, interesting trial, interesting sort of set of circumstances. Recommend highly, if you get the chance, download this week's episode of the Art of Wrestling podcast. It's Colt Cabana's podcast, where he's talking about his... it's kind of an audio journal, audio diary, in sort of the same way that I plan on presenting next week. He's just going through day by day of what it's like to live through this trial. He recently sort of changed how he did the Art of Wrestling. It used to be an interview show where he'd go to a building, and of course he'd have a friend there in the locker room at a particular show that he was working at, and he would sit down and he would interview them. Over this last year, he started doing instead sort of a little bit more of an audio journal where he would have sort of short hit interviews with people as he's sort of going along, but more talking about what his week was like. And like I said, I haven't had an original idea for this podcast since I started it. Why would I stop now? I'm kind of ripping that format off a little bit, starting next week, just as a little tester, a little teaser to see if I like it. Anyhow, if you are interested in hearing more about this, I would recommend listening to that podcast. It has very little to do about professional wrestling. Has to do exclusively about this trial from Cabana's point of view, and he's not a legal beagle by any stretch of the imagination. He is. He's just a guy. He's a professional wrestler. He's been doing this for a decade and a half or whatever it's been, and he's just trying to live his life. And obviously, this is a big stressor on him, and he's obviously quite happy that it's over. So that is that for Cabana Punk. We're moving on next to a couple of other short hit stories here, and then we'll come towards the end of the podcast, another couple of trials. One trial and one other piece of legal news that came across my desk this week. My brain has just pretty much been in the legal world this week. It's been a busy week at school, busy week at work, so I haven't had much time to think about much else. So that's what you're getting from me this week. So another couple of things just to end the show off on here. We're going to file this one under I've listened to it so that you don't have to. I think it's a follow-up actually to an old story that I had on the show. I think I talked about this at one time or another. Former WWE superstar Enzo Amore, his former cruiserweight champion. He was let go from WWE because, largely it seems because he was disliked by the entire locker room, was more trouble than he was worth. Bit of a showboat, bit of a douchebag on social media. Just kind of an awful person, it seems. He was sort of the sort of straw that broke the camel's back for Enzo was allegations of sexual assault of a woman in Phoenix. This woman was a sex worker, had some drug problems, also a stripper, and had alleged that Amore had drugged and raped her. So it came out recently in the last couple of weeks that there was insufficient evidence of this ever happening. She never actually filed an official report, as I understand it. It was never actually, no charges were ever actually laid. So it wasn't that she had filed a false report or anything like that. So she's probably not going to suffer any. Not going to suffer any legal consequences from that side. Enzo has hinted at, and we'll get to that in a second, a possible civil suit, but, we'll keep an eye on that as to whether that ever happens. The reason that I'm bringing this up is that Enzo Amore, the former Enzo Amore, because that's not his real name. I believe it's Eric Arendt or something along those lines. But he is a rapper now, and he's going by Real One. That's REAL and the number 1, and he released a let's call it a song called Phoenix, and subtle play on where the alleged assault happened, or was alleged to have happened rather, and he's a phoenix rising from the ashes, guys. It's not good. I'm not the biggest hip hop fan in the world, admittedly, but goddamn, it's just you can tell that he thinks he's doing something real good here too. That's kind of the sad part about it. Fuck, I have to bring up the lyrics here just to give you a couple of pieces of the Real One's genius. So the music video that he released for this starts with a caricature of a sloppy fat wrestling fan, which is just real class, buddy. The only reason that you have any sort of name recognition, you're going to make fun of them. And his whole intro is, "Listen up, you sloppy jalopy son of a bitch, sitting on your fucking couch with your fucking phone in your hand, doing your armchair detective work. You think you know what the fuck is going on?" So he's basically, going after the people who were roasting him for, just probably being a bad person, regardless of the rape allegations. But whatever. Later on in the show, later on in the song, he. Because realistically, it's just this is just it's a reality show at this point. It's awful. Eyes full of hate on the Crazy Eights. You want to see how I pivot, ball in my court, bounce back wearing number 24. So there's the first reference to another person who is alleged to have raped someone, Kobe Bryant. And he talks later about how he's not a Bill Cosby. Okay, sure. The real poetry in this song comes in the hook. And still I rise from the ashes like a phoenix, middle finger to the sky, gripping my consensual penis. What? Holy fuck, man. Like, he can't have played this for anybody before he, like, tracked it, right? Like, he can't have shown anybody these lyrics before he actually put it down. There's no fucking way. So, oh my god. So, he talks about later in the show later in the song about how he's thinking about doing a civil trial against the woman who accused him. Maybe should have taken a page out of Eminem's playbook here. He settled all his lawsuits before he said "fuck you, Debbie." So I don't know. I mean, if you're really curiously, morbidly curious, I guess, about this, again, we'll call it a song, I guess. Go ahead and watch it, I guess. Go ahead and watch the video. It is not great. Like I said, I'm not a huge hip-hop fan. I'm not the biggest hip-hop head in the world, but Jesus Christ, man, this is bad. Anyhow, we'll move on. Next thing I wanted to talk about is the judge in the Brock Turner case has been recalled by Santa Clara County. So Superior Court Judge Aaron Persky was actually voted off the bench this past Tuesday, becoming the first California judge to be recalled in 86 years. Aaron Persky is the guy who he's the judge, of course, who sentenced former Stanford swimmer Brock Turner to basically to 6 months, but like 3 off for good behavior for raping a girl. Basically saying that he had been punished enough and that he had a bright future ahead of him as a young man, and blah 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 blah. We talked about this a little bit in my class this week. I'm strongly of the opinion that I think that good call to recall him. I think that it's basically the right decision was made there. If you want to make an argument, because like here's the thing that here's where I'm willing to play a bit of devil's advocate. Okay, here. Okay, I'm willing to play a little bit of devil's advocate and saying, like, if you want to make the argument as Persky does himself, that there needs to be some room made for restorative justice, that you can't go crazy for a first-time offender in terms of the sentencing. You can't you can't throw the book at them just because you find that the crime is taking on a particular importance in the culture at the moment. You still have to follow the fundamental principles of restorative justice, of trying to rehabilitate someone in addition to punishing them. Listen, totally fine. I understand that. I get that. That's totally okay. The way that he presented this information, though, was at odds with how that should be presented, and I think that comes back to what we were talking about earlier with in terms of lawyers. All judges were lawyers at one time or another, and they're not always the most eloquent beasts in the world. Kind of similar to the Justice Lenehan thing here in Nova Scotia, where he said clearly a drunk can consent when he wasn't when he was giving his reason for judgment in terms of letting an alleged cab driver who had allegedly raped a woman and acquitting him in that case. clearly a drunk can consent. Not the best way to put things in that case. If you want to argue, say perhaps that there was some question as to whether or not